Hello, everyone. Welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. At the beginning of this year, US President Trump initiated a tariff war against China. Not only did this fail to give him any advantage in negotiations, but it has also deepened domestic conflicts within the United States. In response, China has taken targeted countermeasures. Besides rare earths, another move has been to completely stop purchasing American soybeans since May this year, instead placing large orders with suppliers such as Brazil and Argentina. This has left American soybean farmers who have been sidelined in a state of panic. The New York Times emphasized on September 25th that since May this year, China has not withheld any American soybeans. Politico also published an article on September 28th highlighting this situation, noting that this dramatic shift is reminiscent of what happened during Trump's first term. At that time, when the US-China tariff war broke out, US soybean exports to China plummeted from $14 billion in 2016 to $3.1 billion in 2018. Marc Busch, who served as an advisor to the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and the Department of Commerce from 2012 to 2018 and is now a professor of international business diplomacy at Georgetown University, said, "Why are we surprised by this? This is simply a repeat of Trump 1.0. China doesn't need to wait for so-called Liberation Day or for fentanyl tariffs to take this step." During Trump's first term, this tactic was already used skillfully and with significant effect. Reports indicate that China's suspension of U.S. soybean purchases highlights how Trump's attempts to use tough tariffs as a bargaining chip to secure better deals have repeatedly backfired. In response, China has countered with retaliatory tariffs, non-tariff countermeasures, and export controls on critical minerals. Now China is once again stepping on the brakes in a key area of U.S. agricultural exports. If Chinese buyers continue to stay away, the U.S. soybean industry could face devastating blows. In fact, the retaliatory tariffs initiated by China have impacted not only soybean producers. According to data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, in the first 7 months of this year, the total value of U.S. agricultural exports to China dropped by 53% year-on-year. Politico emphasized that on the eve of the 2026 midterm elections, China's halt of U.S. soybean purchases has also dealt a blow to key Republican districts. Brockman, who served as U.S. Deputy Trade Representative under the Bush and Harrington administrations, believes that the Chinese want Trump to feel the pain and for American farmers to say, "This man has really cost us dearly." Due to the U.S. imposing excessively high tariffs, China wants to break away from its soybean trade relationship with the United States. It's clear that votes from soybean-producing regions are also crucial. American soybean farmers are complaining and even protesting. The White House said the Trump administration is aware of the plight of American soybean farmers and will take measures to mitigate their economic losses from losing Chinese buyers. A White House official who spoke anonymously about the government's trade strategy said China's decision to stop purchasing soybeans was regrettable because it could have greatly alleviated the U.S. trade deficit, but President Trump promised to provide assistance to farmers if necessary, just as he did in his first term. A person close to the Trump administration said that Dulong strongly protested and warned that tariffs could cause economic losses. The White House was completely caught off guard by the strong reaction of farmers, forcing senior government officials and Trump to listen to emergency intelligence recently because there was indeed an information gap. The news network reported that even if China and the United States, the two countries, are making progress on a trade agreement now and in the future, but agricultural professionals believe that even if they can reach an agreement, it will be too late to save the profits of many American farmers. Darren Johnson, a fourth-generation farmer and president of the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association, said anxiously, "We are running out of time. Even if we finally reach an agreement with China, it will not be in time for this year's harvest season." Reports indicate that China's refusal to purchase U.S. soybeans during the peak harvest season in September suggests that this is not just an increase in relative countermeasures. Politically, major soybean-producing states in the Midwest, such as Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Indiana, are important political bases for the Republican Party before next year's midterm elections. Politico believes that China's strategy seems to be paying off. It is said that these groups, traditionally allies of Trump, have been complaining to the White House, blaming Trump's tariffs as the main reason why China is refusing American soybean crops. The wave of protests from farmers is also growing louder. The report further believes that in addition to facing this situation in the short term, the prospects for the U.S. to resume large-scale soybean exports to China in the long run are equally bleak. The Chinese side has doubts about the reliability of the Trump administration's trade commitments, and with China promoting a strategy of self-sufficiency, this could mean that American farmers will lose the huge Chinese market for the foreseeable future. Cameron Johnson, a partner at Shanghai Supply Chain Consulting, pointed out that for China, the U.S. is now seen as unreliable. When might the U.S. cut off the supply of soybeans, natural gas, or other resources? Because they have already done so in areas such as semiconductors. Precisely because of this, in this way, the more Chinese buyers try to distance themselves from American suppliers, the harder it becomes for the U.S. to restore large-scale soybean exports to China. The supply chain will become entrenched, and once it is entrenched, China will think, why should I still look for American suppliers? I can just keep buying soybeans from Brazil and Argentina. It might be a bit more expensive, but at least I know they won't cut off supplies or disrupt shipments like the U.S. government does. The article from Politico finally points out that China's decision to abandon American soybean producers in favor of Latin American suppliers also involves considerations of geopolitical strategy, as China has significantly increased its purchases from these regions. The surge in Brazilian soybean purchases comes at a time of heightened political tensions between Washington and Brazil. This reflects China's confidence that its decades-long efforts to deepen relations with Latin American countries are paying off, enabling these countries to reduce their trade dependence on the United States. Lazarus, who once served as a special assistant to the commander of the U.S. Southern Command, said this sends a clear signal. China still has many friends around the world, especially in the global south. These countries have become a security buffer for China and have also strengthened its bargaining power in negotiations with the United States. In summary, first, the White House seems to have overlooked the consequences of China not buying soybeans, and the backlash from soybean farmers was greater than Trump had anticipated. Second, with the U.S. midterm elections coming up next year, and farmers being a key Republican voting bloc, the soybean move can be said to have struck at Trump's Achilles heel. Third, this is not only effective in the short term. From a strategic perspective, buying more soybeans from Brazil also gives Brazil more leverage in tariff negotiations with the United States. In addition, Trump now does not dare to confront China, and with many countries unwilling to offend China, the space for activities of some overseas Hong Kongers who rely on anti-China forces in the United States is beginning to shrink. According to a Financial Times report on September 29th, Nathan Law, the former chairman of Demosisto, who is wanted by the Hong Kong SAR government and living in exile, arrived in Singapore last Saturday to attend a conference, but was stopped by local border officials. He was detained for 4 hours and afterwards was informed that he was denied entry but was not told the reason. He eventually flew back to his departure city, San Francisco, on the morning of September 28th. Now holding both a U.S. passport and a British national overseas passport, Nathan Law said he obtained a Singapore visa for this trip 3 weeks ago and said that even though he held a valid entry visa, he was still detained. The Financial Times also cited some sources familiar with the matter, revealing that during his detention, Nathan Law contacted some people, who then informed the UK and US governments about the incident involving him. However, it is currently unclear whether the governments of these countries have contacted the Singaporean authorities. Nathan Law was arranged to fly back to San Francisco and arrived there on the morning of September 28th, local time. According to the Financial Times, Nathan Law's trip to Singapore actually carried risks because Singapore and Hong Kong have an extradition agreement. However, Nathan Law insisted that he had received legal advice stating that political crimes are not covered by the extradition treaty, and he believed that if Singapore wanted to extradite him, they probably would not have granted him a visa in the first place. To sum up a few observations. First, Hong Kong and Singapore do indeed have an extradition agreement. Normally, people like Nathan Law, who are wanted by Hong Kong for inciting unrest, would usually avoid places like Singapore. This time, Nathan Law knowingly took the risk, seemingly with the intention of making noise and seeking international exposure. Second, why did Singapore issue a visa and then refuse him entry? Clearly, Singapore's government has changed its approach to such cases. The US and UK were aware of the incident, but it's unclear if they made contact. Regardless of whether there was pressure from China, the result is that the US and UK are not particularly concerned about this type of Hong Kong opposition figure. Singapore did not face significant diplomatic pressure from the US or UK to receive Nathan Law. One could say that such dissidents are now facing the prospect of being abandoned. Third, as the US intensifies its strategy to contain China, and China increases its countermeasures, the intensity of great power rivalry is now the strongest since the Cold War. Most countries are trying to avoid taking sides, not wanting to offend either China